everyone. So today we're going to be doing part 2 of our Calathea Catchup. So back in November, at the end of what is the traditional growing season, I had given you guys a catch up on all of my Calathea plants because I wanted you to see how they were looking as we headed into winter. Because traditionally, for a lot of us, Calatheas don't perform nearly as well during the winter, and they tend to give us more problems during the winter than any other time of year. And so the plan was to do this second Calathea Catchup today so you could see how well everybody fared throughout the winter season. And just a quick reminder that these plants have technically been reclassified into the genus Scopertia. However, most plant stores are still using Calathea on their plant tags, so as long as they're doing that, I'm going to keep calling them Calathea in order to avoid causing any kind of confusion for you guys. But the first Calathea that I want to give you a catch up on is my White Fusion Calathea, and when we looked at her back in November, I did not bring her physically out here because she was dealing with spider mites, and honestly you guys, she's been dealing with spider mites repeatedly all winter long. Here's what she looked like the last time you saw her, and unfortunately she is not looking as great now because of the spider mites. Now before I show you what she is looking like right now, I want to let you know that you're going to be seeing something interesting on all the plants pretty much that I'm showing you today. You're going to see little hanging sachets on there, and that is because I am experimenting with beneficial bugs for you guys right now. I will be releasing an upcoming video sometime in the next few weeks for you on that. So when you see what you're seeing on her, and in particular on her, there's going to be a little box, and I will explain how all that works in the beneficial bugs video when I do that. But just know that that's what you're seeing on there. This is an experimentation I'm doing specifically for you guys to answer some of your questions regarding beneficial bugs. But here's what she's looking like right now. She did lose a lot of leaves, and then also I've noticed with her, especially in the winter, that the whiter the leaves are, the more likely she is to get crispy edges on them. So since she does have quite a few just naturally white leaves going on right now as well, she is looking a little bit crispy. However, you guys, she actually has continued to push out new growth all winter long, despite losing a bunch of leaves, despite having all these spider mite problems. So I'm actually kind of impressed with that. The year before this was the year that, well, she had spider mites once again, and the treatment went a little bit awry, and she ended up losing pretty much all of her leaves and came back completely from scratch to what you saw she looked like back in November. So I'm not concerned about her being able to come back from this. Right now, I'm just like concerned about finding the best way to keep the spider mite population under control when it comes to her. She is the biggest spider mite magnet out of any plant I have ever seen. And honestly, you guys, like, part of me wants to be like, if you're having spider mite problems on other plants, just put a White Fusion Calathea nearby and they'll all just flock to that one instead of the rest of your plants. But no, don't do that. We don't need to sacrifice a plant for the sake of the other plants. But that's just how I feel sometimes, is that the spider mites are just going to flock to her for whatever reason. They absolutely love her to death. And yeah, so hopefully, you know, good results happen with the beneficial bug situation and other things I've been doing. And of course, I will give you an update and let you know how that goes. But she is still alive, so that is good. We did not lose almost all of our leaves like we did last winter. So all in all, given the situation, I'm feeling, you know, pretty good, because it could have been a lot worse. But let's move on to our next plant. And I think we're going to look at my Calathea makoyana next, also known as the Peacock Plant. And so honestly, you guys, when we looked at this plant back in November, I had mentioned that the plant had finally started putting out new leaves. We were getting much larger leaves, which were making me very happy. And I was really hoping that that growth would keep up throughout the winter. Unfortunately, it did not. We did not grow much at all, if at all. I honestly don't even know if we got any new leaves throughout the winter. I don't think we did. However, we did not lose any leaves either. And honestly, that is pretty much exactly what happened the previous winter as well. So that has held true through 2 winters for me with this plant now. But now that we are, let's see, what is today? Today is March 19th. Now that we are moving officially into spring, actually I think tomorrow is actually the official first day of spring, if I'm correct. And so now that we are moving into that time of year and it has started to get warmer here, the humidity has started to increase, I am now starting to see new growth on this plant, and she's actually getting a lot of new growth. So in general, she's not going to look much different right now than she did the last time you saw her, but I'm going to try to get you close up in here to see, and I might just have to film some separate footage and splice it in here, but she's got a ton of new leaves coming in. I think I see at least 3 or 4 going on right now, so I'm super excited about that. And it does look like some of these are going to be pretty big. You can probably see this one right here. That is, I think, going to be the biggest new one that is coming in. So I'm super excited that we're already starting to kick off new growth. So I'm thinking we are going to get a bunch more new leaves like we did last spring and summer. And honestly, we didn't really start growing that much until summer last year. So this is a good sign that we're starting to pick up earlier in the season. And once again, we didn't really lose any leaves. I think maybe I cut off like one of the oldest leaves throughout the winter on her, but that's pretty much it, you guys. So all in all, I think she's done fabulously. And can we just talk about the lack of crispy leaf tips? There are like no crispy leaf tips on this plant. Even my Rattlesnake Calathea's got more crispy leaf tips this winter than this plant. So I am really, really impressed with this one right here. But let me set her aside. And speaking of our Rattlesnake Calatheas, I think we'll look at those next. Just a reminder that I do own 3 of them. I still laugh at the fact that I own 3 of them. If you guys have been here for a while, you will know that I typically am not a person who likes to own multiple of the exact same plant. I'm kind of like, you know, why? If I can have a different type of plant, I'd rather, unless it's just like for styling purposes. You know, that was the only plant that really worked in a place where I was trying to style something, then maybe. But the whole reason I own 3 Rattlesnake Calatheas is because one of them, the original one I bought, almost died. We'll get into that in a bit. I actually bought the first one we're gonna look at as kind of a replacement for that other one in case it didn't come back, and it's just like so big and beautiful. I mean, it wasn't like I was gonna get rid of it once the other one did come back. And then the other one that I own was actually a birthday present from a friend of mine, not this year, but the year before. And so, yeah, that's how I ended up with 3 Rattlesnake Calatheas, but they are fabulous plants. They are some of the hardiest Calatheas, honestly, in my experience at least. So first one I want to look at is the big one right here. And honestly, pretty sure we're looking a little bit bigger than we were in November. Here's what this one looked like back in November. And honestly, you guys have actually seen this one fairly recently because we did repot this one in February, I believe it was, into this slightly larger pot. It has not skipped a beat since we did that. And part of the reason that I had repotted it was because I was having to water it more frequently and we were starting to lose more leaves, which can be a sign that your plant is severely root bound and needing to be repotted. And since we repotted it, I haven't really lost any more leaves. It has put out a ton of new leaves throughout the winter, just like it did the winter before. It is still putting out a ton of new leaves right now. It's so like compact, it's hard for me to even count how many. I can see at least 4 right now. But absolutely love this plant. It is so beautiful. Now we did get a few crispy leaf tip situations going on. I don't know if you can see like that. So that's about like the worst that I get on Rattlesnake Calatheas. It's just a little bit on the tips. Maybe it'll spread up the edge a little bit, but typically they don't get super crispy. However, once again, kind of shocked because I feel like the makoyana got less crispy than most of the Rattlesnake Calatheas this season. So all in all though, very happy about how this plant has performed. So let's look at the next one. And that is the one that I like to call the little rattlesnake that could, because this is the one that almost died. So this plant, when I bought it, had been severely underwatered. I knew it was underwater, but I didn't think it was like to the critical level, and we lost like all of our leaves. I did a whole video on it called Is It Really Dead? I'll link that in the description down below for you guys if you hadn't checked it out yet, so you can see kind of what this plant looked like. But we got down to 1 leaf. It wasn't even a full leaf. It was only half a leaf. It sat like that for months. And then this past spring, summertime, it finally started to push out new growth. Here's what it looked like the last time we looked at it back in November. It was finally starting to look more like a full plant. I mean, not super full, like a full baby plant, if you will. But it has put out so many new leaves since then. And just a reminder, in the middle of winter, when did we do that? Yeah, I guess that was in December, was when I finally moved plants upstairs into my upstairs living room. And this is one of the plants that we moved up there. And it wasn't a huge change for it because it was in an east-facing window downstairs and it's an east-facing window upstairs, and it's done fine. It has definitely put out new growth. It is definitely looking a lot more full, and there are a ton of new leaves coming in. Do you see that? We got like one over here. We got this one over here. There's a little one back here. And this is just in the last like week that it started to push out all of this new growth. So I can see, oh, there's another one I didn't even notice before. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 new leaves coming in. in this pot. So this plant is really starting to fill back in. I know it has been a slow process. Some of you are like, oh my God, it took forever, but it didn't die. That's all I care about, is it didn't die. It came back. And you know, I am the biggest preacher of the fact that Calatheas, don't throw them away. They will come back. They are rhizome and tuber-based plants. They can and will come back. I should honestly have like some shirts made that say, don't throw that plant away. I don't know. Would you guys buy those? Let me know. Comment down below. Maybe I'll have some made for you. But yeah, it's amazing to me like what plants can do, and it may have taken a while, but it has come back. We are not too far away from now being the size that it originally was when I first bought it, when it was critically underwatered, and I didn't realize it was critically underwatered. I'll flash a picture up here for you of what size it kind of was at that point. So very proud of this plant. It is very happy living in that upstairs window, and one of these days, hopefully it will be as big and beautiful as this guy back here. Oh, and by the way, I think we lost one leaf, one of the oldest, tiniest leaves throughout the winter, and that was it. And honestly, we've got like one little crispy bit on the very end of that leaf, but other than that, no crispy leaves either, so very impressed. So let's take a look at the one from my office. Honestly, I think this one performed the least good, but it's not surprising to me, and let me tell you why. So this plant gets the least light out of all three of these Rattlesnake Calatheas, because like I said, the other two live in east-facing windows, so throughout the year, no matter what time of year, they're getting that morning sun when the sun comes up. This one in my office is living across from a north-facing window, and it is on my desk, so it is about 3 or 4 feet away from that window. So during the winter, we don't get as much light coming through those north-facing windows, so it's getting less light during that time of year than it will be during the summertime, for example. So I'm not surprised that it didn't grow as much. Here's what it looked like last time you saw it back in November. And honestly, you guys, I don't really feel like it looks too much different now. Maybe a little bit bigger, but we didn't get too many new leaves. We did continue to get new leaves throughout the winter, but not as many as on the other ones. And then we did lose probably more leaves. Well, that's probably not true. Probably about as many leaves as I lost on the big one, but they were just natural leaf loss. It wasn't being caused by anything like irregular or anything like that, but definitely didn't get as many new leaves as on the other ones, but that has changed in the last week. This plant is putting out a ton of new growth. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that I can see so far. New leaves coming in. You can see there is a big one coming in right here. And so yeah, we're gonna start to fill in a lot more, it seems like, starting right about now. I did get more crispy leaf situations going on this one as well. I don't know if you guys can see in there. Let me try to move that leaf. For example, on that leaf right here, more of that happened on this plant than on the other ones. Once again, I'm just gonna attribute this to the fact that it is in an area where it is getting less light than the other two, but all in all, still looks pretty good, guys. At least I think so. So once again, I highly recommend, if you are scared of getting into Calathea, you haven't had any before, highly recommend Rattlesnake Calatheas, also known as a Calathea insignis. Yes. No. Let me back that up. Formerly known as a Calathea lancifolia, technically now known as a Gophertia insignis. But yes, these are very hardy, one of the best ones I can recommend trying for your first Calatheas if you are scared about being able to take care of a Calathea successfully. And I just shook a ton of his dirt all over myself. Give me 1 second. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to our next plant. And the next one we're gonna look at is my Calathea Freddie, also scientifically known as a Calathea or Gophertia concinna, I believe it is. And the last time you saw Freddie back in November, Freddie was looking fairly decent, but he was having a slight leaf issue. There was this rust-colored kind of looking weirdness going on some of his leaves. I did treat him after that video with a fungicide. Honestly, it just never spread. It just was on a few of those leaves. I don't know what it was to this day. I don't know what was causing it. I have since removed most of the leaves that had it. I think looking right now, he has like one leaf that looks like it still has some of that going on it. But all in all, I really honestly am not sure what caused that. But like I said, since it wasn't spreading, I just kind of let it be after I did that fungicide treatment. And then as those particular leaves started to yellow, I just cut them off. So Freddie did lose a handful of leaves since you last saw him, but not too many. And just like last winter though, not really getting a lot of new growth. Pretty much, I think maybe we got one new leaf. So here's what Freddie is looking like right now. So once again, probably not much different looking than what we just saw from back in November, but honestly not surprising to me either because Freddie slowed way down in growth last winter as well. And then this time last year is when Freddie decided to start flowering, and Freddie just flowered all spring, all summer, all the way in through to the fall. All he did was flower. And of course, when plants do flower, lots of times they will sacrifice their older leaves in favor of the flowers. So that is what happened with Freddie last year. We really didn't get any like new leaf growth at all while all that was going on. And then, like I said, he didn't stop flowering until shortly before I filmed that video. So we really have not gotten new leaves in like almost a year. However, just like the other plants that we've been looking at, just in the last week, Freddie has started to push out some new leaves. And I am very happy to say that I don't see the start of any flowers going on. So maybe we're not going to go through flower insanity this year, and maybe we'll just work on putting out more leaves. Now, I don't see a ton of new leaves starting in here, but there is two that I can see that have almost pushed all the way out. They're really high up in there though, so I'm not sure how well you're gonna be able to see them. There's one right there. And there's another one on the other side that's like even further in the middle, so you probably won't be able to see that one that well. But you know, I'm still happy that we didn't do horrible throughout the winter. Like I said, we only lost a few leaves. They were older leaves. And we did get more crispiness than on some of the previous plants we were talking about and looking at. So if you can see on that leaf right there, there's definitely some crispy leaf tips there. And we have that kind of on a fair number of the leaves here, but still not looking absolutely horrible. So Freddie really performed about the same as he did last winter. I'm not surprised. I'm actually more interested for him to see how he performs during the spring and summer, just because that flower issue. I mean, he looked beautiful while he was flowering, but it wasn't doing him any favors, and I kept trying to remove them and he just kept pumping more out. So we'll see how things go this spring and summer for this guy, but let me set him back aside. And I think we're gonna look at my ornata next. So let me go grab that plant real quick. Okay, you guys, and real quick before we look at this plant, I just wanna let you guys know that with the exception of that baby Rattlesnake Calathea that we were looking at that I did move in December from downstairs to upstairs, but still in an east-facing window, every other plant you're gonna see today has not been moved from the place that it was living in when you last saw them in November. So this is just how they fared in those locations. And so the ornata that we're about to look at, shortly before I filmed that video in November, we did relocate that plant to my coffee table. It was not a drastic change for it. Really, it was just moving it a few more feet back from the window that it was already in, and it did fine. It honestly did fine. So here's what it looked like back in November. And just a reminder that the previous winter, this was the plant that performed the worst for me. It lost a ton of leaves, and then we still had 2 bad leaves from that whole debacle. And I have since then lost those leaves off of this plant. Now the good news is you saw back in November, it had really filled back in over this past spring and summer from what it looked like from the previous winter. And honestly, I was very concerned about how this plant was going to perform. It is notoriously bad for people in the winter. It did awesome, you guys. It did awesome. Look, I'm so impressed. Like I don't, it's like, it's a completely different plant from how it behaved the winter before. Now the winter before it did get spider mites. Well, it got spider mites that fall, and treating the spider mites leading into winter, which is already a season that, like I said, Calatheas typically don't like. And that's honestly usually related to the fact that the humidity gets so much lower in my house, or just for people in general. But just knowing how bad this one had it the winter before, I am super impressed. The only leaves I removed off of this plant throughout the winter were those 2 ones that were already messed up when you saw this plant last November. Now we did get, I think, one new leaf. So we really quit growing. That did not surprise me. We did not grow at all last winter either, but we still look great because all we lost were those 2 crappy looking leaves. We look better now than we did in November just because we don't have those crappy leaves on here. And honestly, once again, starting to push out a ton of new growth already. Well, I say a ton. There's 2 new leaves coming in, but for this plant, I feel like that's a ton. It doesn't grow nearly as fast just in general as, for example, the Rattlesnake Calathea. But as you guys can see, hopefully, we got a new leaf coming in right here and another new leaf coming in right over here. So super excited to see that we are already starting to put out new growth. I do see that one of our older leaves is starting to look a little bit yellow, so we might be about to sacrifice that one off. But one of the other craziest things to me, look at the leaf tips. There is not a ton of crisping. And the good leaves that I still had on this plant last winter, they went crispy so fast. They went so fast into just total crispiness. I mean, it was bad. It was bad last winter. And honestly, you guys, the humidity in this house this winter was lower than it was the previous winter. And last winter, I actually ran quite a few humidifiers in various places in this house. I didn't run any this winter at all. Not once. So, super impressed that we do not really have crispy leaf tips. There are like a few, I don't even know if you can tell. There's like a tiny tip on that one. This one is a little bit crispy, just a little bit. But all in all, I mean, way better than like before. I'm like just very, very impressed. We are clearly happy living on the coffee table. We are going to stay living on the coffee table because this is what we're gonna look like living there. That is obviously where we wanna be, and I am not gonna mess that up. But let me set this gal back aside, and I think we're gonna look at the orbifolia next. So it's way over there, let me grab it. Okay, so let's take a look at what the orbifolia looked like back in November. So as you can see, looking rather big and beautiful. It did have 13 leaves back then. And just a reminder, this is a plant that I had explained to you guys tends to actually grow less during the spring and summer for me. Well, honestly, less more in the summer for me than say for the fall and winter. And that's because where it is in my kitchen, it is offset from a southeast window. So during the summertime, it's not getting direct light coming in that window. And because it's offset, it's getting less light that time of the year than it is, for example, right now. I'm looking like where it was on the kitchen table is getting direct light right now. And it will get direct light for a large part of the day. Now, once again, it is pretty far away and off to the side, so that direct light's not going to hurt it. But because this time of year is getting more light, this is when I see more, like during the fall, winter, and maybe the start of spring is when I see most of the growth happen on this plant. So not surprisingly, we put out a fair number of leaves throughout the time period since you last saw this plant. We still look big and beautiful, absolutely loving it. And the funny thing though is, you guys, this plant, and this happened last year too, so I'm not totally surprised, but when we finally started putting out new growth, we sacrificed our oldest leaves for whatever reason. I mean, it's not like there was anything wrong with the plant. It wasn't getting overwatered. It wasn't getting underwatered. It just decided, hey, I've been hanging on to these old leaves for too long. I'm gonna throw them away. So like I said, when you saw this plant back in November, it had 13 leaves. It has 13 leaves today. Even though it's gotten a bunch of new leaves, it just kept losing its older leaves. So I don't know what it's going to take for this plant to get bigger. I might need to put it in a brighter location, but I just love how it looks on my kitchen table, and it's doing fine. It's not like it looks bad or anything like that. It probably just could get even more big and beautiful if I had it somewhere else. But honestly, if it got too much bigger and beautiful, it's not going to really fit on my kitchen table. So I guess it works out in the end. Now, we did get some crispy leaf tips going on. Once again, not surprising. That does happen more for this plant in my experience in the winter. This is probably the worst leaf right there. You can see that. It's got some crispiness kind of all the way around there, but still, it's not too bad. And honestly, last winter, it was a little bit worse. It spread up the leaves like quite a bit more, like at least like that much up the leaf. And still, you know, it didn't look too horrible or anything like that. But all in all, when it comes to the crispy leaf issue this year, with all of them, with the exception of one, which we will get to here in a second, I'm really impressed. And once again, I have told you guys, everybody jumps to the conclusion that crispy leaf tips on almost all plants, but especially on Calathea, are related to humidity. And like I just said, the humidity in this house was worse this winter than it was the winter before. Winter before, I ran humidifiers. This winter, I didn't. And we're doing better from a crispy leaf standpoint this year than we did last year. So I really, really just don't buy into that. Check everything else first before jumping to the conclusion that it is humidity. But all in all, really impressed. I see that we do have one new leaf starting to push up. It's just way, it's just a point coming up out of the soil. Like I won't be able to get it up there tight enough for you to see it. That is starting to push up here. So that'll be our 14th leaf. And hopefully we won't sacrifice any of our older leaves when that one comes in. And so hopefully we will put out a few more. We can get up to a few more leaves. And like I said, fingers crossed we don't lose any more before we stop getting the direct light coming through that window. But once again, all in all, pretty impressed with this plant. But let's go ahead and put this guy back, and I think we'll look at my Calathea warscewiczii next. Okay guys, so I know you can see part of this plant right here right now, but let's go ahead and take a quick look at what this plant looked like back in November. Now this is my newest Calathea. I had not had it that long back then. I'll flash up on screen for you when I actually acquired this plant. This is my first velvet leafed Calathea that I have ever owned. Plant looked great back in November. It had been pumping out a ton of new growth since I had bought it. And then we moved into winter and I was a little bit nervous. Now, honestly, you guys did see this plant recently because we repotted it last month. So you kind of already saw how it was doing, but let's talk a little bit more about how it actually performed throughout the winter. Now, the most exciting thing that happened with this plant throughout the winter was that in late December, it started to get flowers. So if you see these really tall, kind of lanky looking stems up here, those are the stems that produce flowers. That's why they shot up so tall. They shot up that high and then they produced the flowers. They do produce leaves with the flowers when that happens. And so that was kind of an exciting thing. And I did get a little nervous that it was going to be a Freddie situation where we were going to keep flowering, but we didn't. Those were the only 4 flowers that we got, and I trimmed the flowers off. And then as you can see, we have started to put out even more and more leaves from where those flowers were on all of these stems. Now, some of you might think this looks a little crazy. I actually kind of think it looks really kind of sculptural and cool. If I wanted to, I could cut those long bracts off, but I didn't want to, especially because it was winter time. And, you know, I feel like if I'm getting new growth period on a Calathea during the winter, that's pretty good. And this plant, non-stop new growth, you guys, non-stop new growth. And I want to see if I can get this flipped around. I don't know, it's going to be hard for you to see it because of all these other tall stems here, but the newest leaf just unfurled. Oh no, there's an even bigger one unfurling over here. Okay, first of all, it's so hard for me to get it. That big leaf right there is one of the newest leaves. There is another new leaf coming in right down here next to it. And then back here, I think this leaf's going to be even bigger right there. The one that is unfurling right there. It's going to be another huge one. Now, all of those new leaves are pushing out from the base of this plant. So all in all, I think the base of this plant looks pretty good compared to what it looked like in November. We have, however, lost quite a few leaves. And like I said, I think that was related to the fact that it needed to be repotted. And so after we repotted this plant, it actually has done pretty well. It did lose quite a few more leaves. Oh, not time. Well, I mean, it's put out, like, for every leaf it's lost, you guys, it's put out at least 2 or 3 new leaves. So I'm not that worried about it. But we have lost a few more of our older leaves since we repotted it. But that's not uncommon when you repot plants. Sometimes they'll drop some leaves as part of the, like, you know, shock process for the transplanting. And then we did have some leaves that were damaged when I bought this plant that I pointed out in that video back in November. 2 of those are still on here. Let me see if I can get it to where you can see. This is so much heavier since we repotted it, by the way, but that leaf right there. So that was a small brown spot. It has since spread, but it's not something that's being caused by like a fungal issue or anything like that. I think this plant had some light damage on it when I bought it. And so I think that leaf's just naturally starting to die off now. And then there's one other one that's, I think it's a little too tucked away for me to show it to you, but it looks pretty much identical to that one. I think we're probably going to lose those 2 leaves next. But once again, I'm not worried about that because I'm not seeing those kind of marks on any of the other leaves. So that's just something that the plant came with, and it's now just killing off those leaves in favor of the big, beautiful new leaves that it is pushing out. But once again, you guys, do you see crispy leaf tips? Other than that, other than those ones that were already damaged? Not really. Not really. None of these leaves are looking super crispy. I was concerned that this plant was just gonna go to a complete and total crisp over the winter because I have seen a lot of people who have the Calathea zebrinas. I've seen that happen a lot. That's why I didn't get a zebrina first. I would love to own one, but I got this one first because I had heard that it might be a little bit easier than the zebrina. And yeah, I'm just really impressed with how this plant has done. I'm really impressed. I was worried where it's living in my bedroom. It does get some direct light, even though it is pretty far back from the south-facing windows. I was worried it was gonna burn. It is not burned. It is, like I said, doing much better since we repotted it. I'm not having to water it nearly as often. I'm not seeing it get to the point of the leaves curling up because it's thirsty, because it was getting a little bit unhappy with me, I think, because that was happening a lot before we repotted it. So all in all, I am feeling very impressed with this plant. It makes me feel way more confident about trying a Zebrina. I'm not going to be trying a Zebrina anytime soon though. I'm pretty happy with my collection as it is right now, and also, as you guys know, currently unemployed, so not supposed to be spending money on plants. But yeah, definitely a beautiful, beautiful Calathea. Absolutely love it. Very impressed with how it did this first winter in my care. So let me put this guy back, and we've got 2 more plants I think we're gonna look at. Okay, so the next plant we're gonna look at is my Calathea Roseopicta medallion. And last winter, this plant performed the second worst for me. The ornata performed the worst, as I mentioned before. And this one was kind of the second worst. I shouldn't even say worst, like the least well, performed the least well for me. This plant is notorious for giving people problems, especially in my area. Like all of the other planty Instagram people in this area are always posting about how crispy this plant gets for them. But honestly, this plant, hands down, performed the least well for me this year. Like we saw the ornata behaved fabulously this winter. Rosy, not so much. And I honestly don't know what the deal is. She did a lot of the same stuff that she did the previous winter, but let's go ahead and take a look at what she looked like back in November last time you saw her. So she wasn't looking too bad here. She did get a bunch of new growth throughout the spring and summer. We did lose some leaves, but not a lot of leaves. I had mentioned I had been struggling to find a place where she was happy. Since November, she has been living on my nightstand next to the east-facing window in my bedroom. Now that east-facing window is where the big Rattlesnake Calathea, the makoyana, and Freddie all live in front of that window. So I know they're happy with the light. She should be happy with the light. She definitely seems happier in that spot than she has been in some other spots, but there's just been some other weird things going on, you guys. I don't even know, but like, she still doesn't look horrible, okay? Like, we're not that bad off, but we don't look our best. We haven't lost like a ton of leaves. Well, we did lose quite a few leaves, and I think we got a couple new leaves this winter, which is probably about the same as last winter. I think she got at least 1 new leaf last winter. She definitely was not one of my faster growing winter Calatheas, but we just have some other weird stuff going on. And so you can see we definitely got crispy leaf situations going on. That's the worst one right there. But there's still plenty of green there for this leaf to photosynthesize. I could cut it off if I want to, but I don't want to like take away from her being able to convert energy to food and be able to grow new leaves. But there's other weird stuff going on. Can you guys see this leaf? I might have to film some different footage with my iPhone because I can't get as close up with this camera, but there's like pitting on that leaf. And I'm not sure what caused that. I don't know what is going on. That it happened on multiple of the leaves, and some of the leaves that she did lose had that, so at least those ones are gone now. It's also kind of on the stems on some of these leaves, and so yeah, it's very confusing to me, you guys. Maybe after I gave her a pest treatment, like one of my preventative spray downs one time, maybe I just put her back in that spot too soon, and it was early in the day and she got some direct sun and it reacted with the pest spray and caused some of this pitting. That's my best guess, in which case, my bad. So sorry, Rose. But once again, that's why it's a good reason to, honestly, it's probably good practice to do your spray downs later in the day so that they have overnight to fully dry before they start to get sunlight back on them. But I know that's not always practical. Like, we have time to do it when we have time to do it. But if you have time to do it during a time of the day where direct sun's gonna hit the plant, just don't put it back until later in that day so that it's not getting that direct light. But all in all, still, like I said, not too bad. We do have new leaves coming in. This one right here is starting to unfurl, and then there is one over here that is also starting to unfurl. And, you know, I think we'll pick up growth here, you know, in the next few weeks or so like everybody else is doing. And hopefully we just don't continue to drop a lot of leaves. However, last spring, all the leaves that looked crispy like this, she immediately, once she started pushing out new growth, all of these just went bright yellow, and it was like they were done. She was like, I don't need that nasty looking crap on me. I want to look beautiful again. I'm just gonna kill off all of those leaves. So don't be surprised if you see that. And I do see that happen more on Calatheas like Rosy and the orbifolia that are much wider stemmed Calatheas versus the rattlesnake and the ornata and the makoyana that have the very thin stems. they tend to do this business here, and then when they finally start to push out new growth and be happy in the springtime, they immediately turn these bright yellow and they fall off. So don't take that as a sign that, oh my God, you've done something wrong. It just seems to be something that those plants go through. I guess it's the more broad medallion-sized leaf Calatheas as well. But all in all, like I said, not too bad, but she's definitely not like the one that's performed the best for me, but not entirely unexpected because that's what happened last winter. But we have one more plant I want to look at. It's not actually a Calathea, but we did look at this plant back in November because the previous winter I had so many problems with this plant. This is my Stromanthe triostar, aka Tricolor Ginger Plant, which is why I refer to her as Ginger. And as you can see here, looking fabulous back in November, but let me flash up again for you guys what this plant looked like the previous winter, because she did have some leaf issues. Still not entirely sure if it was bacterial or fungal. I'm leaning towards it was fungal. Finally got it cleared up, but we had lost a ton of leaves. And so I was super happy that over the spring and summer, she just, you know, got more big and beautiful and filled back in. And even though she lost all those leaves during last winter, she still pushed out new leaves all winter long. And so she's still been living in the same spot in the north-facing window in my dining room. So let me go grab, I've started to refer to her as Big Mama. I've got 3 plants I refer to now as Big Mama, and she is the most recent one because she has gotten huge, you guys. Hold on. Okay, guys, I'm not even sure if I can, I'm worried she's, I'm probably gonna be hitting the monstera with her if I can even get her all the way on screen. Can I get her all the way on screen? Is she all the way on screen? Sort of, kind of, maybe? Maybe she's all the way on screen? I mean, look at her. She is massive, she is big, she is beautiful. She has not stopped putting out new leaves all winter long. I think we have lost maybe 3 of the oldest, tiniest leaves. But yeah, just non-stop growing, not even really crispy. We do have a few crispy leaf tips, and honestly, you guys, most of the crispy leaf tips on here are because I did go a little bit too long between waterings on her a couple of times, and that's when she started to get these tiny little crispy ends on the very, very tips there, but that's it. There's nothing else. It's not even on a lot of the leaves. And can we talk about the coloring on the newest leaves that are coming in here? Look at that. Look at how beautiful that is. Now it's definitely coming in a little bit yellower on the new leaves, but that's not always uncommon. Where's the other new one? There it is. And so eventually what happens is they harden off. I find that that yellow turns more into that whitish coloring. But look how beautifully variegated they are. I mean, oh my gosh, you guys, she is massive, and I can still see. I'm not even gonna try to count. There are so many new leaves still being pushed out in here. She definitely needs watering, I can tell, because she feels like super light. Normally I can't do this with her, like swing her around like this. If she has just been watered, she's pretty heavy. So definitely gonna water her after this, but I am just so impressed. We do not have any leaf issues. Honestly, the biggest issue I've been having is the fact that the plant, well, at one point during the winter, she had the philodendron Brazil hanging above her, and now she has the philodendron, no, not philodendron, Scindapsus exotica hanging above her, and those plants guttate and then drip down on her, so she's got these like white spots on some of her leaves. Let me see if I can find one where you can see it. I don't know. Oh, can y'all see that white spot like right there? Like it's dripping down, so she's got these white spot drip marks on a bunch of her leaves from that plant, those plants gutating down onto her. So I just have to like clean her leaves off a little bit more frequently than I normally would. But other than that, done amazing. Absolutely love her. But yeah, so that is how all of the plants have done. Once again, I am honestly just super impressed with how they did this winter. I am happy that for the most part, everybody did either equally as well or better than the previous winter, with the exception of Rosy. But you know what? She really didn't do that much worse or anything than she did before. So once again, you guys, I really just want to drive home the fact that even though Calathea have this reputation of being super difficult, super fussy plants, and that a lot of times it is centered around you have to have crazy high humidity in your house. Once again, biggest thing that people say, it's not necessarily the case. I honestly think the hardest part for a lot of people who own these plants to get right is the watering, because they really, really don't like to dry out. And in my experience, that's when things start to go awry. However, don't be afraid to try a Calathea, because once again, proof right here that even if it dies back to the soil, it can and will come back. I've had multiple of you reach out to me and send me pictures of your calatheas that have died back to the soil in the winter, and you're like, well, I'm just hoping it's gonna come back in the spring. And in the last week or so, you're sending me pictures of a bulb pot with a leaf pushing out like this, and it's starting to come back. So honestly, don't be afraid to give them a try, and I do once again highly recommend the Rattlesnake Calathea for your first Calathea, as it tends to be one of the hardiest and easiest in my experience, and I've heard the same thing from multiple other people. But I hope you guys have enjoyed coming along today and getting this little catch up on how everybody did throughout the winter. If so, please be sure to click that like and or subscribe button down below. And if you have not checked out the original video from back in November yet and would like to do so, you can watch that next, right here. Thank you so much for joining me today, you guys, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Aloha!